Kia ora tātou. E mihi ana ki te rangi, e mihi ana ki te whenua, e mihi ana ki ngā maunga, me ngā waihorapa nei o tēnei whenua o koutou, ngā mana whenua, tēnā koutou ngai tuahuriri. Kei aku iti, kei aku rahi, kei aku whakataitei. Nei, ko te mihi kia koutou e manawa nui ana ki tēnei kaupapa, o te rā ki tēnei mahi. Mai kore ake koutou, mā koutou mahi, e kore ngā wawata o tēnei kaupapa e tutuki. E tika ana te whakatauki. He tūpuna, he mokopuna. Mā wai e whakaki i ngā whāwhārua o ngā matua tūpuna, mā tātou mokopuna. He mokopuna, he tūpuna. Tēnei o te raroa ngā puhi, ngā tiparau me ngā tahinga e mihi kauana kia koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Morena. That whakatauki I just used sits at the heart of my mahi as the Minister for the Prevention of Family Violence and Sexual Violence. It draws us to the essence that a mokopuna is precious, a fountain of ancestral knowledge and an everlasting reflection of those who have gone before. Therefore, tamariki and mokopuna are to be affirmed with the utmost reverence and respect. And I wanted to acknowledge that whakatauki that I believe Billie Jean talked about just this morning, that linked mokopuna and tupuna, and the whakatauki of he waka eke noa and all of the mahi across this room and out in our communities constantly reminds us of the centering of whakapapa in this work and of the link between mokopuna and tupuna, constantly pulling us all out of this linear colonial concept of time, that it's forever our koru, forever our circle. That whakatauki also aligns with the briefing paper from Professor Leonie Pihama, Dr. Naomi Simmons and Dr. Waikaremwana Waitoki that was sent directly to ministers, including myself, which provided an oversight of research findings from the project Te Taonga o Taku Ngākau. I'm about to send off my formal receipt letter to that briefing paper, but I did want to use this occasion and this kōrero to also respond to many of the issues raised in that work and in that paper. Firstly, I want to acknowledge all who have contributed to He Waka Eke Noa, the kaimahi Māori who established and continue to develop kaupapa Māori services. We've had the beautiful pictures reminding us of some of those people just this morning. Kaupapa Māori services and practice ngā kaimahi rangahau who have steadily built the evidence of the experts who are whānau, as Leonie reminded us this morning. And all those who have supported the research team from ngā Waia Te Tui, I didn't see you yet, Jenny, kia ora, to realise He Waka Eke Noa. I also want to thank the research team for the way you have brought He Waka Eke Noa to us all. My goodness, it's beautiful to be kanohi kitea back with us after so many years. Kaupapa Māori research and evidence must be at the heart of all we do, and the quality of it will contribute to the efficacy of the outcomes we all need to achieve. I'm not just talking for Māori. I'm talking for all of the mahi in preventing family violence and sexual violence, for everyone. Today is a long-awaited opportunity for us all to come together, ka nohi kitea, to āta whakarongo, to keep learning from the whakaro within the research, to keep learning from our whānau experts and from the speakers that are simply here presenting it today. And I have to say, the anticipation that Leonie referred to that has been building since March this year when ngā Waia Te Tui began their webinar series and hosted the Thought Space wānanga. This is an ongoing mahi that didn't even start then. This has been ongoing mahi for generations. The research affirms the power of community and whānau to lead the most enduring solutions for peaceful lives. The research gives a voice to those who are often without a voice, invisible, and who are most underserved and trampled on by the system. The findings provide a platform to hear how Māori cultural frameworks have and must lead this work in family violence and sexual violence. And I keep hearing Professor Linda Graham on my shoulder through the Ngā Waia Te Tui series and ongoing work, talking about the difference between kaupapa Māori being used and appropriated, especially by government, and kaupapa Māori leading the work, which requires kaupapa Māori practitioners and researchers. Te Aorere Kura, the national strategy to eliminate family violence and sexual violence, centres te tiriti o Waitangi, mātauranga Māori, and whānau-centred approaches, collective responsibility, and I heard Ngai Tuahiriri this morning talk about the tauparapara of binding us all together in this mahi. Collective responsibility and strength-based well-being, prevention, and importantly, healing. Re-indigenised healing. And I just very quickly, as I was listening to Here Aroha, Billie Jean, Leonie, our mana whenua this morning, right from the start, I've been constantly sitting at that tepu in this room of amazing people who I can't even begin to name your influence on not just me, but all of this mahi. Te Aorere Kura is not a kaupapa Māori strategy. It has been pulled together with government, tangata whenua, whānau, community, the sector, with a range of diverse insights and informants with diverse experiences. But I'm not going to pretend that it is in and of itself a kaupapa Māori strategy. And as government and Crown begins this work of better upholding and affirming kaupapa Māori research and practice, we are having to try and find an authentic place as Crown for how to honour this work. It just happens to be that I am wahine Māori as a minister, but I am Crown. I am Crown. In this mahi, I am Crown. And what I am always conscious of, and this is slightly new space that we're actually getting into. It also represents the strongest possibility, the strongest opportunity that we've had, and I want us all collectively to grab it and hold it and keep it to account. But it's a bit of a new area of how do we authentically have a relationship that upholds kaupapa Māori and all of the other words that we use. But the concept of the Crown not appropriating, but instead properly supporting and enabling and affirming the leadership of tangata whenua, that is a bit of a new space, because up to date it has been just blatant over-the-top oppression of our mātauranga and our people, moving into using some reo and seeing if that starts to change practice, and we all know just using the reo does not, starting to move into, some power sharing, or even just putting it down on paper as a start, that must happen. So as a wahine Māori leading the overview and the journey of Te Aorere Kura, the strategy, I am very clear the strategy must be owned by the people, and that is important because it cannot be a strategy that bends to the will of short-term political cycles. It is a minimum intergenerational strategy that must stand and be brought to account and not watered down at all. In fact, it's got to be strengthened. It is only a starting point, a strong one, a decent one, that I put my hand on my heart about giving true opportunity about, but still only a starting point, so that it can evolve and learn from how we're going. And I'm constantly conscious as a wahine Māori minister of what that means then as government works out how to stop being racist, how to stop appropriating, and how to authentically affirm a true power-sharing relationship with tangata whenua. And we're at the start of that journey as a government. We're starting to see some of those discussions and kōrero being had. Oh, look, I've gone all over my blimmin' notes now. And at this point, I can't go past Prue, and I don't know if Tā Mark is in the room or not, but their leadership under Te Rōpū, even getting agreement to have a strategy was a whawhai. Having a strategy that actually acknowledged racism and colonisation was a whawhai. That in itself was a miracle, in fact. But it was really important to me to be able to work with my ministerial colleagues and all of the agencies who sit underneath Te Aorere Kura, who are accountable to ending violence, including the state's violence. It was really important to me to have some key concepts in cement in Te Aorere Kura. And that required both charm, but actually, it was the expertise of our whānau upholding the values of manaaki, aroha, whakapapa, mokopuna, rangatira, tupuna. It was that actually helped us get this over the line. What are we talking about when we acknowledge colonial oppressions that have brought us to this state of violence? What are we talking about when we want to decolonise and re-indigenize our entire world? Just simple stuff. Aroha, manaaki, whakapapa, whenua, taiao, maunga, wai. Just simple stuff. That's the stuff. That's the charm and the strategy that will reduce the fear and allow us to just do our work. And that's how, in the end, I had to shepherd Te Aorere Kura to at least a starting point. This is stuff that has come from our whānau. That's where the expertise has always been. And that's the stuff that I have the privilege of taking into the cabinet table. Where am I up to? Speaking of Professor Linda Graham, I do want to run us through Te Aorere Kura, but actually acknowledge then what Te Aorere Kura even means. If we are going to grab hold of our mātauranga and our reo and our tikanga, then we need to understand what we're accountable to as a Crown. Aorere is the fifth star of the Matariki cluster. Aorere is a mana wahine star responsible for correcting the energy flow of the Matariki cluster while in flight. Oh, I want to acknowledge, let's go back one paragraph now that I've gone everywhere, the whakaaro from Rangatira Brad Toterewa, who gifted with accountability this name Te Aorere Kura. She ensures the safe journey of the Matariki cluster when travelling from one destination to another. Aorere does this with people, and she transmits healing energy from person to person, destination to destination, including the acquisition of knowledge through wānanga like the one we're having today. No matter where we travel in the world, physically, intellectually, spiritually, the role of Aorere is to ensure the energy flow is balanced. The word kura provides the connectivity to kura waka, the place of origin to which Hine Ahuone was created. Kura provides a number of definitions that allow Te Aorere to traverse multiple contexts. And that is crucial for us because if we know anything about the work that we have to do to end the scourge of family violence and sexual violence, it is that the causes are many and complex, and likewise the solutions that Te Aorere Kura leads us towards. Te Aorere Kura is the vehicle that will help us to implement intergenerational focused strategies and healing. And so it's this is the accountability of Te Aorere Kura. This is what we have to uphold now that we have been gifted the name and the tikanga and the whakapapa behind it. And I don't take that lightly. And I continually uphold across my ministerial colleagues and all of our agencies. That is the accountability to this strategy. The details of the strategy are enveloped and surrounded and supported by an enduring spirit of affection, te ao rere kura. Therefore, we need to ensure that the strategy aligns to the tikanga of te ao rere kura. Te ao rere kura insists that a te ao Māori lens is interwoven into the fabric of this national strategy and holds us together as we move forward in the mahi of its implementation. Te ao rere kura must be grounded in te ao Māori, and through implementation we will see the real change that comes from these opportunities. As the briefing paper that I referred to says, what we know in theory must be put into practice. And as I have also said, there is a power shift that must happen for this theory to be put into practice, and I will continue to both advocate and speak on that at all levels, including across my ministerial colleagues and our agencies, but also working with the agencies to pull those levers to actually make it happen. That's the hard stuff. We've seen practice all around our motu, and look, just here this morning I want to acknowledge the beautiful whānau at Te Puna Oranga who have already, through Billie Jean, presented and who I've met with and visited and continue to draw on their programs and their mahi, which is just one of many examples of this theory in practice, of supporting whānau, of supporting whole of whānau and whakapapa. And actually you saw, just through Te Puna Oranga, through the presentation, you actually also saw the whakapapa of the work. You saw continuation of mahi, continuing through kaimahi, intergenerational kaimahi. And I remember that. I remember you, Ariana, talking about your mum. And I remember Te Puna Oranga talking about that whakapapa ongoing cyclical connection of the mahi, not just of the issue. I've mentioned that Te ao rere kura has a stronger focus than ever before on strength-based well-being, prevention in the first place, healing, and increases the opportunities for the role of tangata whenua and community whānau leadership in achieving intergenerational change. Te ao rere kura is expected to impact on people a number of ways. We will have tamariki and mokopuna understanding healthy relationships, knowing how to seek help, and being able to access tailored services that are readily and clearly available to them. We will have participants in the justice system protected, safe, and supported as they go through it. This calls for a justice system that actually delivers justice. We will have both individuals and whānau supported so they can heal from and overcome the trauma of violence, the trauma of colonisation, the trauma of racism. We will have tangata whenua, Pacific peoples, ethnic communities, LGBTQIA, rainbow communities, older people, children and youth, and disabled communities being able to access tailored services and supports. Women, wahine Māori, trans women, and others impacted by violence will be able to access integrated and inclusive responses to get them safe again and to keep them safe. Those that use violence will be accountable, but also supported to change and address their trauma and support their healing. We will live in an Aotearoa with a reduced tolerance, I say no tolerance, for violence and inequity. I want to acknowledge that yesterday I attended a community-led beautiful event in Auckland City for International World Homeless Day, and I'm very clear it must be End World Homeless. And what I heard was rangatahi who are currently without safe shelter and whānau and homes stand up talking about their experiences as rangatahi experiencing houselessness, and immediately connect their situations to the harm and violence that they are experiencing. These are interconnected issues with a backdrop of unacceptable inequity, which, as many, including Leonie, have continued to remind me, poverty is also violence. And the rangatahi stood up and made that clear and spoke their truth and reminded me once again of inequity needing to be at the core of this mahi. We all want to live in a country where families, whānau and communities also can take their own action to prevent family violence and sexual violence. And again, we've already heard this and been reminded of this morning. Te Aorere Kura provides an insistence for whānau being supported as having the most enduring solutions. Now, we've heard that today, but in my political world, that is a really hard place for Crown and politics to come to a collective understanding on. And when I talk about whānau being at the forefront of the most enduring solutions, of those people and whānau and family who are at the forefront of harm and violence, being the leaders of the healing and the peaceful lives, I have to make it really clear, not in this room, but I have to make it clear everywhere else I go, and especially with politicians, whether, and I'm talking about whānau, whether it is whānau who belong with gangs, whether it is whānau at Dilworth or Gloriavale or Leafy boarding schools. And that is a reminder to me about the stigma of violence and how only some whānau and communities are negatively impacted on by it. That another over the top of violence is another political violence, narrative violence that happens, but only to some. Only to some. And this is why, as a minister, as a wahine Māori minister, who chose to and will keep choosing to sit down with those at the forefront of harm, including wahine and gangs, knowing very well that they are the solution. They are the solution. And the amount of backlash that will get me is very, very different. Very, very different from if I sit down with the leafy suburbs and talk about preventing their own violence. And I wanted to talk about that because the, I guess, narrative and political violence that happens in a leadership position when you hold up those approaches and when you seek to eliminate the racist and bigoted stigma, classist, racist, bigoted stigma that can be associated with violence. That felt really hard and continues to feel hard, especially in today's environment, but that's actually the political work. And yet, with all of that ongoing, sustained political violent pressure on me as a minister, that is my role. With all of that, none of that compares with the accountability, the sense of accountability I feel to this room, to our whānau and our communities that you're all connected to. I think it was said earlier today, and including by Leonie, who are we accountable to? First and foremost, whānau. And so as I was this morning, as I was thinking about what I was going to say, I was going to talk about how I find it, I have to chuckle to myself when I think about all of these role models, so many, I can't even start to name you all, in this room and not, who have informed, taught, nurtured my part of the journey as the collective of our mana motuhake journey, who have personally supported and nurtured and held me to account, and that will continue to be the role. And I thought to myself, now I have to stand as a minister in front of my peers, in front of particularly these amazing wahine, who are the scariest and the staunchest in this mahi that I can ever come before. And it was a really interesting feeling, because as I said, as a minister, I am crown. And so my accountability to this mahi, and fancy having a wahine Māori minister who has come from the communities and the mahi to now try and overcome the long enduring systemic racism and colonial approaches that have perpetuated ongoing violence, to now try and turn that around. That was my little bit of pati to ask for some patience. It's also not just on me. I'm not even just talking about the collective ministerial responsibility, the collective leadership at agency levels of public and Crown agencies. This is collective work in our space, in our political space, but I also know that this is collective work genuinely together, that there are roles for everybody, I am keen, so I'm just going to have a look at, check our time, yeah. I know that I am keen to get to kōrero and questions, so I will try and pick out a few more of the important points to get us to that time very, very soon. I did want to pick up the Family Violence Death Review Committee report, one of the most recent reports that came out, because I wanted to acknowledge Tūtama Wahine. I'm next to Ngaropi and Kitarangi down there, Manaaki Tai Rāwhiti and Tūhoi Hauora, as being affirmed through that research and upheld as examples of best practice. And I'm seeking to pull those particular rōpū together to enable us to be accountable to the reminders that were in that report, for particularly the accountability of Crown. And there was so much in there, so I'm not going to go over all of it, but what I wanted to pick up this morning was the concept of the mana motuhake of whānau in services, in using and accessing and reaching for support and services. And that was one of the core tenets that came out, was agency and consent of whānau, to be able to dictate and lead, design, create, dream their own pathways for service, for responses, for healing, for prevention. That was outlined as one of the key differences between a duty of care and a duty to care. The difference between, and I know again, Linda talks about this a lot, the enduring patriarchal and paternal approach, particularly of Crown, that has always, and it has come from, and I've said this, I say this publicly, I've said this to my ministerial colleagues, I say this to the agency leads, it has come from a deeply rooted belief that Māori do not love our tamariki as much. That's where the removing tamariki perspective, that's where that foundation has come from. A clear, blatantly racist ideal and understanding that Māori do not love our children enough, that we do not know how to care for them. And so, and Hira just said to me just before, the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the abuse, state violence, I have a clear responsibility to always validate the voices of survivors, and to continue to call from accountability across my colleagues as to how to stop that. Ongoing, perpetuated. This is not historical, it's ongoing. Those visions that I talked about at the start of my kōrero of what we are working towards, of where we want to get to. That's not happening right now. I know, despite sleepless nights, I know it's not going to happen as soon as I want it to either. I know it's going to take time to undo the oppressions that have gotten to this place. But we finally have an opportunity to stop it from happening for another 100 years, for more thousands of years. We have an intergenerational opportunity to, yes, it will take time, it will take working together, it will take a shift of power, but we are naming that, and I am asking for the people to continue to keep Te Ao Rerekura to account so that no other politician, no other minister dare to step back from it, no matter whether they are wahine Māori or not, that no one dare step back or accept or tolerate any watering down of this path, and that actually our collective mandate strengthens to improve on the starting point of Te Ao Rerekura. So that was where the intersection of, and we've had he waka eke noa and ongoing kaupapa Māori research for many generations that also has affirmed the consent and agency, the mana motu hake concept. Te Ao Rerekura, it means no more of that. It says never again. And yet I know that in the meantime, our agencies do continue to perpetuate that same platform, that same paternal, patriarchal and colonial approach. That is everyday, ongoing hard mahi. One of the key areas of where that mahi, of where we can start to immediately make a difference, and Tūtama Wahine reminded me of this just the other week when I visited them in Taranaki, is in the workforce capacity and capability, particularly across Crown. And so by that, on a very practical level, I'm talking about how can we ensure that corrections and probations workers and officers have a clear understanding of the dynamics of violence, have a clear understanding then of what is needed to properly support whānau when they make their operational decisions, and at the very, very least can stop causing more harm with the decisions that they make. Recently, a few months ago, I was privileged to support the launch of the workforce frameworks. These have been led and created by the sector, and they are a start to ensuring that Crown agencies have a capable workforce in the first place. This is one of the areas that I know has to make one of the most important and substantial changes on workforce practice. Oranga tamariki, education, health, police, corrections, courts. Te mea, te mea, te mea, te mea. These are where these frameworks are starting to be rolled out now. We also, just after that, had the release of kaupapa Māori sexual violence practice frameworks. So we are building up the broader capability, two things, to prevent further harm from being perpetuated across our system, and to also ensure that we are able to, that all of our kaimahi can support and point and awhi people to the right places for the right services at the right time. That's just one of the particular examples of, okay, we've launched a strategy, now what? And that's one of the areas. Now, there is more mahi to do in that space in terms of workforce capability. And there is also, how do we ensure that our community, and again, Leonie's being a long-standing advocate and push for kaupapa Māori practice, leading broad, upscaled capability for our communities and whānau to be able to lead and do this work. It needs the resource and authority and support. That's what it needs. Okay, whānau, look, I am crossing my fingers and hoping that in my moving off the tracks of my speech, I've covered most of the stuff. I'm keen now to get into kōrero and questions. because I know that's actually where we will find some of the gold, actually, and I'll probably get to pick up some more of my kōrero that I maybe haven't pulled up. What I'm going to just finish on at this point is I'm off to Christchurch Women's Prison after this, later today. I've got a whole program of mahi down there, particularly connecting with family violence, sexual violence sector. And again, it is to be able to understand how, firstly, just really want to acknowledge, we want to stop all wahine, especially wahine Māori, from getting to prison in the first place, and that requires a complete and utter rollback of the racist and systemic oppressions that are in our justice system, including in our laws and our policing and our courts, that continue to push wahine Māori into prison at an unacceptable disproportionate rate. And they are there. And so how do we best manaaki our wahine who are also there? And so I'm looking forward to heading out there and sitting and talking with whānau at Christchurch Women's Prison today. Today is my son's birthday, Horauta. He turns 15. And I wanted to acknowledge that. I just wanted to acknowledge, and I see some of my babies through Leonie who are here today, and I just wanted to acknowledge that it's an enduring irony, all of us in our mahi, we're all about whānau, and this mahi also takes us away from whānau, and it has done. And that's one of the things that I was thinking about this morning. But that's okay. We had a dinner for him last night, knowing that I was going to be away today. I haven't been able to get to my kids' birthdays in about 7 years since I became an MP. But that's the accepted and understood of this mahi that all of you have done for your whole lives, of broadening the definition of whānau to our wider community and sector work. So we are still here with whānau. But at the birthday dinner we had last night, I had my two mokopuna, Raya and Aria, who I call them my mokopunjabis, because they now have brought into my whakapapa our Indian Punjabi whakapapa. And I wanted to acknowledge that because Te Ao Māori acknowledges the inherent dignity of everyone's whakapapa. And there's so much more of our intermixing happening as our generations progress. And I say, my mokopuna are 100% whakapapa Māori and 100% whakapapa Punjabi. And that is core to the principles of Te Ao Rerekura as well. I also wanted to acknowledge, I haven't talked about Te Pū Kotahitanga, the Ministerial Advisory Group. I talked about Pru leading Te Rōpū and how hard that whawhai was. We've got Denise here. I know there may be others. I don't have my glasses on, but Ministerial Advisory Group, I call it a Ministerial Leadership Group. Part of the essence behind that group was to have a mana ki te mana relationship. That tangata whenua, especially through the Te Rōpū process, it highlighted very clearly there needs to be a leadership level relationship in this mahi. And this has been behind the establishment. That also, those members of that group have done incredible mahi, are connected to their communities, both researchers, practitioners, survivors, and I couldn't be more humbled and intimidated by that group. And I know some of you are here in this room today. But it's going to ensure and provide again that direct level of accountability, while also I am very clear that Te Ao Rerekura needs to work with tangata whenua, with Māori at every level. But yes, we also have a leadership level advisory group as well. As I said before at the start of my kōrero, I am just one minister who happens to be wahine Māori, but I am confident that we are setting in place, because of your ongoing advocacy, because of your ongoing disruption, that we are setting in place an opportunity that we have never had before. It's up to us to maintain it, to embolden it, to nourish it, as is in the name of Te Aorere Kura. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora mai tātou katoa.
Kia ora. Kia ora. I'm not sure, it's on. So we'll go into this next part, will be open for questions. So there's a mic going that way for anyone from that end of the room or this end of the room. Kei te tūwhera te papa.
Make my job easy.
Surely we don't have a question for the minister.
It's just sitting
Surely.
in a bit.
Too easy.
I know I didn't cover everything. Papai. Get the ball rolling.
Pāsaraka.
Pass it on.
Kia ora. Tēnā koe māua.
Kia ora.
I'm interested in the relationships in terms of the shifting of power and power sharing. So do you have any whakaaro around, so at the moment, primarily most providers sit as subcontractors, which is clearly not a power sharing relationship.
Yeah.
So do you have whakaaro around how we can shift from a subcontract relationship to more of a tira waitangi based relationship?
Kia ora. So Leonie just happened to pick up on the whole entire page that I skipped in my kōrero. Thank you. Thank you. So the days of contracting, maybe if I just firstly overview, you all know it, but if I just firstly acknowledge some of the problems of our current model of commissioning, shall we say, it is contract based, but the contracts they are not power sharing, they are not authentic relationships, they are often output based rather than outcome focused for whānau. They are short term and not able to affirm sustainable mahi in our communities. They set up competition. They go against the nature of collaboration, which is also what we are going to need across community as well. Instead, they set up an environment of competing as opposed to working together. And I'm looking at so many of you who have come under the harm of this way of commissioning and working. Actually, I'm looking across the room and I'm looking at so many of you whose organisations and whose mahi has come under the harm of the current state of commissioning work. It has also not upheld whānau-centred, true kaupapa Māori research and practice. They have diminished, the way that we have worked have diminished the mātauranga Māori expertise, the expertise of whānau. So I've just outlined some of the ways of what isn't working and what hasn't worked for a long time. That must stop. Te Aorere Kura cannot work. It cannot go forward at all without calling for an end to all of that. So yes, we do currently have what some of you might already know or be involved in called the social sector commissioning work. There are cabinet papers before cabinet right now that are pulling together where we want to go. Far more collaborative ways of working. Now that goes back to what Leonie said. It's authentic relationship, authentic partnering, authentic power sharing. I'm not sure if Helen is in the room, but if we have a look at whānau ora, and if we have a look at even improving on the whānau ora commissioning approaches and getting it down even more into whānau and community commissioning approaches. So that's where the actual power sharing in practice on the ground needs to work. That actually, so in Manukau, recently, I have visited one of our sort of integrated, what does this even mean? Community hub type approaches, ways of working. Now, for that to even work at all, it requires collaborative and higher trust contracting. It requires, and we're starting to see some of this in pockets, it requires that, okay, actually, What are the community asking for? How will they decide where the resource and authority needs to go? Te Aurere Kura can't happen without this changing. So that is where we're moving to. But what I want to say is about timing. While we have got this, as people know, because there has been a public discussion paper out on this also, right at the beginning of this government term actually. So as people know, government are looking at this right now. Public sector looking at this right now. This work, Te Aurere Kura can't wait for those cabinet decisions. And I'm very clear about this, and I've already said this to Peter Hughes. Peter Hughes, I'm going all around the country, emboldening your agencies to just do it. And can I just say, with authenticity, that our kaimahi in agencies, and I just want to remind ourselves that some of our kaimahi on the ground in our local agents, in our local Crown agencies, they also, a lot of them are our whānau in our community. So how empowering is it for them when they are given mandate to be able to properly respond to the community's needs? Heck of empowering. And so I've already been really clear to Peter Hughes, I will be continually advocating and empowering and inspiring our kaimahi and our agencies to just do this mahi, to just move away from what we used to do and go towards a higher trust, true, authentic power sharing and relationship ways of working. Te Aurere Kura asks for that. And no, we can't wait for cabinet decisions. So we're already seeing that. We saw it through COVID for often the first time. We've started to regress back, is what community is telling me, that some of the COVID approaches that were the first glimpse of a higher trust relationship, that some of that has started to regress back. I need to be really, really clear. Just keep going with that. And I think Cindy Kawana is in the room, and E Tupu Air Services, for example, most recently, in the past couple of weeks, I announced them in my homelessness portfolio as being the recipients of some of that better type of commissioning and working with community. So is that you, Stella? I can't see. Oh, kia ora. I've got another pato from that. Kia ora. Is that you, Stella? Go ahead.
Taiho,
Here's Stella. Here, whai Stella. Here's the rākau.
Tēnā koutou katohi, tēnei kia koutou. Ko waio ko ngā tihine rawa ko ngā whātua o Kuiui, ko Stella Ngukimbawa hau. Ko au te tumu ake o te rōpū tū wāhine trust e noho ana ki Tamaki Makaurau. Kia ora. Yes, Minister, I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying about how our communities mobilised during the COVID, and ask the question, why hasn't that had an impact on government, and why is it that now that COVID is starting to tail end, that we're no longer in that position that we were during COVID? We had whānau who were saying to us that they felt safer in the COVID, in COVID, and that our communities were so well mobilised that they were able to feel protected in that particular time. And a lot of these were families from the family violence sector, not all, but a lot of them were. Our mahi in Auckland is around the family violence and sexual violence sector, and we felt as community kaupapa Māori services that somebody had our backs, which is something that we haven't felt for a very long time. So I really want to know why that is. I understand the level of having high trust relationships, because in some ways, and we've been reliant on that to continue for the last 30 years, those high trust relationships. But they've been built with a lot of challenge, and when we get government agencies changing the people who we often make those relationships with, we have to start again. I have a lot of hope and faith in Te Aorere Kura, because I was part of seeing that get established. But I also have heaps and heaps of concerns and how will we as community will we see the changes we need on paper, and there are those having second thoughts about what it means for us, but the spirit that we all entered into developing Te Aorere Kura felt right for us as communities to do, to move forward. And it's the first, I think it's something that, one of the first times I've felt that our input into something was actually genuinely being heard amongst ourselves as community, and wondered how that would make any changes. So I guess I'm sort of putting out the plea
Stella.
that, or asking the question, why? And I know that you may not have the answer to that, or you may, but certainly feels like things have started to go back to where they were, and that really worries me. I mean, and I'm sure there's lots in this room who have those same concerns.
Kapai.
And will
I'll have
Te
a go at
Aorere
answering.
Kura actually address that too?
Thank you. I'll have a go at answering, because we might be able to get another pātai in just before we finish up in this time frame as well, because while there isn't a simple answer, there sort of is, and it's because we haven't yet properly changed the embedded paternalism from government. We haven't done it yet. Yes, COVID required urgent responses. Yes, and we stepped up to that in some ways, yes, but the systemic changes haven't happened, and that's exactly my point. And thank you for raising it again. That's exactly my point, is the underlying paternal approach hasn't properly been transformed. COVID, the quick responses through the COVID, through a health-led approach weren't enough to change the systemic embedded paternal foundations. That's the mahi that I do still believe that community and agencies on the ground just going ahead and doing it will also help us to embed the systemic changes that are needed also. So we still haven't changed that, Stella, and we have to. But Sans, were you putting up your hand somewhere? Oh, and just while we're sorting that out, just a quick mention. Yes, how do we ensure that Te Aorere Kura keeps going? That's the hard mahi. I'm not naive as to how difficult the shifts in Te Aorere Kura are. I'm not naive at all as to what that means for operations on the ground as well as high-level power sharing. But I think we can insist and keep going is all that we've got to keep doing. So
Kia ora,
I think there was
kia ora,
something
Marama.
here. Oh,
I don't really, yeah. I don't really want to stand.
Cindy at the back. Okay.
Kia ora.
Oh, aroha mai rupika. We'll go Cindy and then...
I'm really following on, I suppose, what Leonie started around honest relationships, and also a little bit from Stella. I suppose my question, or just a statement I'm putting to you really, or a challenge if that's what we want to call it, is around the decommissioning of state agencies. Because when we look at budgets and everything that comes out, and there are significant putia put towards whānau violence and sexual violence, but the majority goes to state agencies. And I think there needs to come a time for state agencies to be decommissioned and for them to use the money that they already have as their base funding to do the work that they should be doing, and for that money to come actually into the sector that has been non-commissioned for a really long time, because we continue to hear state agencies and the Crown talking about all this putia and all the work that they're doing, but 20 odd years, and for some in here, and I acknowledge Tanya and Auntie Kiwa, this is 40 years, 50 years. So I'd like to see that kōrero going on around the decommissioning of state and government agencies, and the budget that the government are putting out
going where the work actually happens.
Kia ora.
So it's not a question, it's just a
Kia
statement.
ora, Cindy. Ka pai. Everyone wants a paki, that one. Yeah. I mean, that is it, isn't it? That is exactly. And yes, Te Aorere Kura requires that too. I had that same conversation with my officials right at the start of my term as a minister, where I could see that the tough stuff for me was to see that the Crown being better also required a whole different way of working and setting up an infrastructure that looked like it was going to require some more investment into Crown. And what I really am trying to contend with and push, so for example in the what I'll call regional hub approaches, just for simplicity, is that actually, yes, there is some infrastructure and perhaps facilitation, especially as we acknowledge that different communities are in different states of play. Yes, absolutely. That yes, there is an obligation and a responsibility for Crown to provide whatever infrastructure and resource it can as we affirm the power of community to do this mahi, and that will look different in every community. But eventually we want to get to devolution. And that will mean that actually communities do not have to rely on the infrastructure of Crown and the resources, because that's where it's been perpetuated for generations. That's the hard mahi though, and yeah, I do acknowledge that the budgets are setting up, some of the budget is setting up that scaffolding, and it looks like just more support into Crown agencies. I need it to be towards the vision of setting up Crown to be good, to devolve. And that's probably going to take some ongoing negotiation and thinking and direction from community, actually, because I think I admit that that's been one of the raruraru spots for me, is trying to figure out how does it actually look when on paper it seems like increasing and improving the scaffolding is actually building up Crown infrastructure. And I know that goes against what we're actually trying to do. So just acknowledging that, Cindy, and where we need to get to. There was some...
Okay. Tēnā koe, tēnā koe koripika. Tēnei. I thank you for your kōrero today. I just want to say we really appreciate the mahi that you do. I want to come back again, also to the question around power sharing. You've responded talking, there's been a lot of talk about resourcing, but I also want to talk about information and narratives. Agencies have the capability and ability to invest literally hundreds of thousands of dollars into researching, into framing up what kind of information will be collected, how their information is interpreted and expressed. And yet with kaupapa Māori organisations, we already know, there's inequitable funding.
Yeah.
And the impact it's having, right across the board. But specifically, when Te Aorere Kura strategy was released, I noted that a lot of the agency representatives that spoke that day mentioned data.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously this is coming to the fore, and there's a reason for that. But what I want to know is there is a conversation for Māori to begin to develop our own data, and us deciding what information is important, and us deciding how we're able to collect that information. And this is aside from research, because we know that there are researchers doing the mahi, but this is about those that are in the mahi. How do we do this? How do we come together nationally and begin to have these conversations so we can begin to develop this thinking, because we know that we must be able to manifest this stuff regionally amongst our own iwi borders. So that's kind of what I want to put to you today. How do we get that? Because if we don't have that, then how can there be any power sharing?
Kia ora, ka pai. And again, Ripeka, I want to acknowledge you've also picked up another page I missed out in my kōrero, so thank you. Underneath all of the shifts that have to change for us to work differently and to actually achieve peaceful lives for everyone is the only way that we can do that, the testing, the learning, evolving, is by having proper information, proper data. I'll use those words. But what people like Leonie have also made clear for a long time is that for far too long, the data collection that we have relied upon has also been, well, it's been asking the wrong questions and measuring the wrong things. And so I often talk about this, the example of my nannies at Manurewa Marae when they were starting 15 plus years ago on some of the early whānau ora mahi, and who would say to me, Marama, how do you measure the impact of us? We knocked 6 months at her door, and then only then we were allowed in, and then when we were finally allowed in, we worked for another 6 months to get her to show the light in her eyes to us. How do you measure that? What does it actually mean? And the nannies who were telling me that story that day, they said, we can't capture this on any of our contract information and data. They're not even asking us for this story and this narrative. That has to change. Te Ao Rerekura makes it very, very clear. The data, the information, hasn't even been collecting the power of the stories. And I can't help thinking, whaia of your twinnies, of the boys. I can't help thinking of the power of their stories and so many others, but of their stories, for example, and that we have not been capturing that. So we're at the earliest, in all of the mahi across Te Ao Rerekura, I will say that the deep work that is needed, that Te Ao Rerekura acknowledges an entire new approach to measuring and frameworks and data collection and data ownership and sovereignty. We're at the very early stages of that. It's in there, it is pinnacle. The only way that Te Ao Rerekura can learn and evolve is by having proper information, stories, narrative. And so we're right at the beginning of even understanding what that's going to mean. That's a whole piece of work behind Te Ao Rerekura, but you're absolutely right, that is power. That is power. And the power of the stories behind our twin boys, behind our boys, for example, hasn't been given in the traditional sense of data, sovereignty, collection, and power, hasn't been given in this system the power that it should be. It's starting to impact on our lives only because Te Puna Oranga and Te Pūtahi and the whānau are sidestepping the systems and are getting it out there anyway for us to learn from. But it's been despite the system, not because of it. So I just wanted to use that example, whaia, and acknowledge your whānau and acknowledge that, yes, Ripeka, that has to change for Te Ao Rerekura to work. I think I might have come to the end of my time, so it's been amazing. Kia ora tātou katoa. Makere ana ngahere. Makere ana